In this episode, I sit down with Caitlyn McLelland. We talk about the opportunity for self-awareness, observation, and experience-based learning while homeschooling and having our kids at home during this time. We talk about how making a snack, folding clothes, watering plants, and washing our cars are just as important as the workbook from school and why that's true. Caitlyn also shares how fostering a natural state of calm focus may be as simple and profound as how aware we are when we put a cup on the table. She encourages us to be self-compassionate, gentle, and okay with being wrong, that there's no perfection, and she gives us tips for how to support our children's natural love of discovery. Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I know I was so excited to have you on the Flower Lounge because of your tremendous experience with kids and teaching and Montessori Method. And I'm thinking about all of the parents who are now at home and their kids are at home. And so I wondered if you wanted to, maybe just before we get into homeschooling tips or any ideas you have about homeschooling or projects or any thoughts you have about this time, before we get into that, maybe you want to just talk a little bit about your experience and what makes you so passionate about the Montessori Method and what makes Montessori Method so outrageously unique in the education world.
Okay, well, I guess I'd start to say it's not even really a method when you get into the heart of it. It's more of an attitude and perception that you have on thinking about yourself and thinking about people that you interact with, especially children. And Dr. Maria Montessori did focus that effort toward children with her observations of children specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of the things that's a little bit confusing is it's often compared on the same playing field as different pedagogical teachings, but the starting point for Montessori Method is very different than any kind of traditional education because it starts with observing yourself.
Okay, so that's where things get really exciting. So how does it start with observing yourself?
Well, I think traditionally teachers think that they are presenting information.
Like imparting something into the kid.
Yes. And from a Montessori perspective, you're actually taking a step back. It's not about the teacher. Yeah. It's about watching what's happening in front of you, watching what's happening with the individual child or with a group of children and how they're interacting with the space that they're in. So the space could be anything. It could be outside. It could be at home. It could be in a classroom. It could be at a museum. It could be in a pool. It could be on the moon. It doesn't matter where it is. And from that, taking a step back, you take a step back from what you see and you take a step back from what you're reacting to. And I think that in traditional education, it's difficult to do that because the way that we structure our classrooms is that it's 45-minute periods of time. And we have to produce. And we're only evaluating our production based off of tests or pieces of paper or grades or something like that. But when you take a step back, you can actually start to see what is this person asking for? What is this person actually demonstrating themselves already? And it doesn't have to be verbal. It can be demonstrated by how they act or how they don't act. And it's really easy to judge how we see things. For example, if a child is unable to sit still, it might just be like, oh, well, sit down. This child can't sit down. Well, but if we say, what is the child not doing? We're not looking at what the child is doing. So if the child's not sitting, what is the child doing? The child might be standing. The child might be jumping. The child might be running. The child might be sleeping. The child might be, looking at something on the wall. And it could be different every single moment. And when we give ourselves a space to see that, that's when we really see that person.
Right. So rather than like this, there's someone at the front of the room and they have their material that they've prepared and they are going to present it.
Mm-hmm.
You're letting the kids work on projects individually, independently, or in a group, and you're watching for like qualities, skills,
Mm-hmm.
talents.
Yeah, and actually what you said is really interesting, because a teaching didactic in a traditional environment is only for the child or the teacher to hold. The only person that's getting that impression of that object in the physical sense is the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for everybody else. But in a Montessori environment, that whatever it is, whether it's a model or the pink tower, which is a set of cubes that vary by 1 cubic centimeter, from 1 cubic centimeter all the way to 10 cubic centimeters. When you look at it, it's one thing, but when you touch it, it's something completely different. We are so conditioned to think about our cognitive understanding as a reflection of our actual understanding. But it's more than that. We have so many different senses. We have our visual sense, we have our olfactory sense, we have our sense of taste, we have our sense of listening. And all of these senses are wildly unrefined because we don't practice them hardly ever. And all of these senses are also integrated into our entire body, and they affect our neurological development and how we experience the world. So when we give ourselves a chance to see that, not just the teacher in front of the classroom, not just the parent who's showing, how to do math or whatever, it's letting the other person experience it as if they're experiencing it for the first time, and discover whatever they're discovering for themselves for the first time, and giving them the space to do that. And then once they see it, you will see it. It's there, and then you share it. Mm-hmm. Just sharing that moment of discovery as if it's the first time ever. And it happens every single moment with children. That's their whole life. Everything is new. Every time they see an ant, it's like a new thing. Oh, how many legs does it have? They may not know. They might think the antenna are legs. So then you can bring it to their attention. Well, what does the leg look like? What do you think those little things on the head are for? You don't have to tell them, oh, this is an ant, and an ant is an insect, and an ant has this many parts, and an ant is this, and an ant is that. Don't tell them. Just ask, like, what do you see? How did you find it? What is it doing? Why do you think it's doing that? Mm-hmm. Do you want to draw a picture of it?
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like it's more experience-based learning, and it's requiring active participation. So rather than me saying, this is an orange, an orange is orange, it's bumpy, it tastes like this. Here, you try it. Because I just told you what to experience.
Yeah.
It's like, check this out. What do you think about it? What do you notice? Right? So you're like eliciting from them. You're not like, so the teaching almost, oh my God, this is so geeky, but I'm geeking out. The teaching is allowing their own self-arising nature to arise versus I'm going to teach you, like force something into you.
Yeah. You really can't teach somebody something that they're not realizing for themselves. We can copy things, we can imitate things, but when they truly know it, they're recreating that essence for themselves. I mean, the orange example is a good example. So we have the geometric solids in the classroom, and one of the objects we have is a sphere. So when we start that presentation, we have, I wish I had some of those tools. I mean, maybe we can find something to practice that. Even an orange would be good. But we have this blue sphere, and we don't even introduce what it is when we first introduce it. We just literally demonstrate closing our eyes and feeling every surface of the sphere absolutely silently. And then once we've done that, we place it down in front of the child and just invite them to touch it like how we did. And neurologically, that's doing incredible things for the brain. And they don't even know what it's called yet. It doesn't really matter. The language part comes after the sensorial experience, and it becomes deeper. And then after they have an experience with it, all the kids say, oh, that's a sphere. And then I can introduce another one, like a cube or a cone. And then maybe they can find spheres in the world, like an orange, for example. Maybe they have an orange in their lunchbox. I'll say, oh, that shape looks really similar. It's a sphere. Yeah, it's a sphere. What happens when you open it?
So it's like they're also experiencing it through your eyes. So like they see you having an experience with it, and then they get their experience with it. So it's teaching them also this really deep kind of active listening, right? You're creating this space for them to...
Not just listening, observation. Observation. I think children naturally come from a place of pure observation. That's why I think it's pretty well known in the child psychology world that they model. I think it's like 90% of what they see versus what you tell them. Like, do as I say, not as I do. But children will model what they see. And that's where the observation is. So it is the responsibility of the teacher or the adult or the parent to be aware of what they're doing, how they're doing it. And when that's reflected back, like if I were to take this sphere and I'd be like, put it down hard, the child for sure will do that as well. But if I slow down, and it's hard, it's super, super hard. And I find myself getting caught in, my own stuff.
It's like the cup of water, right? Like the cup of water.
Yeah. But even that, can you do it without making a sound? You did it. Now can you move it over there? Like that. Or can you do it with one hand? It's really fun. And I think a lot of it does have to do with how it's introduced.
And for those of you who are not watching, who are just listening, I'm practicing moving around a glass of water without making noise, which introduces a deep awareness state of what I'm up to, which then gets transmitted to the child if I'm teaching a child.
Absolutely. And we call that analyze movements. That's one of the first things that we learn is how to present something with analyzing the movements that we're doing. And it could be something like sitting down, holding a spoon, standing up.
Okay, so I have so many questions. What is one tip that you would offer, or one idea or recommendation that you would offer parents, aunties, uncles, teachers, etc., people who are around children, to develop more self-awareness, knowing that the kids are watching them as examples? Or like, is it as simple as, I'm going to be aware of how I eat dinner or stand up or sit down or watch something?
I think it could start with that. It could start by being aware of yourself, aware of your own tendencies, aware of, like, do you make noise when you put a cup down? Do you clink your spoon against the bowl? I mean, it doesn't matter if you do, but if you're showing in a demonstration to give somebody a more awareness of what they're doing and how they're doing it, it's kind of curious to see how much attention it actually takes to be able to put a glass down without making a sound, or to pick up a spoon and scoop out of a bowl every morning cereal without making a sound. But also, I think just if your children are in front of you, just watch, just sit and watch and see how long you can sit and watch. Because in a Montessori environment, we try to give the children 3 hours of independent choice on what they do in the classroom every single day. And I think there's definitely room for that right now in our current environment. And children love to do things that are purposeful. And there are so many things around the house that can be done all the time, or things that we're doing every single day that they're watching us do. How do we make it so that they can participate in that? Maybe they can't, chop a chicken, or, I don't know, whatever you might deem as too dangerous. How do you modify it so that they can participate? Maybe they just stand and watch. Maybe they help take out the trash when you're done. Maybe they sort the tomatoes, cut and or count the tomatoes and sort them by color. It doesn't even have to be specifically related to what you're doing, but as long as they're somehow involved with what you're doing. And also, I think it's important for parents to recognize what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with. Because even if I offer a suggestion, the parent has to be comfortable. The parent, like just because I say, oh, we'll have them count tomatoes. If that child has an allergy to tomatoes, or you do not want them touching the tomatoes for whatever reason, then find something else. It doesn't have to be tomatoes. It doesn't have to be anything. It can be folding clothes.
What is some language that you use that you could teach us in transmitting how something purposeful, but also maybe mundane and ordinary task can be fun and not portrayed as like a chore, or no, oh, I have to wash the dishes, or oh no, I don't want to do XYZ, right? I think that's so important. What is some language that we can use to transmit that like sense of purpose and fun in the little things, and not make it like, oh, I have to clean my room or whatever it is?
Well, I think the adult should think and look at themselves. Do they have that attitude? Because even if you're saying whatever words I might say or not say, if you feel that way, I mean, look at that. I mean, sometimes we feel like that. And I think even acknowledging that is okay. But then we can move past it. Like, we still need to wash our dishes. So yeah, that's a lot of dishes. It's just stating what it is, stating exactly what it is. Yeah, that's a lot of dishes. And they've been sitting there for days and they're all stuck. We don't have any other dishes and we can't go to the store to buy plates. What are we going to do? Well, let's soak them. And then, I mean, I did that once with a little boy. Dishwasher was broken, plates were stacked up. We cleaned out a bathtub and we washed dishes in a bathtub, and he did it for 3 hours and he absolutely loved it. And it was so much fun. And honestly, it was his idea to put it in the bathtub. As I said, what space could we put this many dishes in? He said, the bathtub. I'm like, oh, of course, the bathtub. That's a really good idea.
I love that. That's such a great visual. Okay, so just shifting gears here a little bit to this time. I feel like there are a lot of people who are, watching videos at night, following Twitter threads, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to look at everything from all the different angles. And I see people really putting effort into becoming more adept at critical thinking and questioning. How do you see starting kids off with the Montessori method as a way to instill in a culture critical thinking?
In order to have critical thinking, you have to start with observation. If the adults are practicing observation and looking at their own thoughts critically, their own reactions critically, that will create an environment for the children. And when adults can see that and respond to that and let them do that for themselves, it's completely natural to have objective observation when you're given the chance to. And also not hiding that if you're frustrated, like, yeah, okay, this is frustrating. Being introduced to something new is frustrating. We can allow for that space. That's okay. It's totally okay that we're frustrated right now. It's totally okay that we feel like we're stuck. I'm pretty sure most people feel like that right now. And we can experience that as a family. We can experience that with our children. We don't have to deceive our children that we're feeling the exact same feelings that they're feeling. And another thing that's really incredible is if we give children the opportunity to problem solve for themselves, they can identify, well, what is actually the problem here? Ask them I'm really frustrated. The parent might say, I'm really frustrated right now. What is the problem? We can do it. What do we call it? We call it metacognition. Metacognition is when you think out loud, but it's deliberate thinking out loud to demonstrate critical thinking. So I'm really frustrated right now. What am I frustrated about? I'm frustrated because all of these dishes are still in the sink. I am frustrated because they're all dry. All of the food on them is dry. And I'm frustrated because I have no clean plate to put on. What do I do about that? Maybe I'll start by just cleaning one plate. One plate. Okay. And then the child will see that. Mm-hmm. And if they encounter something like that, you can say, oh, I can see that. I can see that we have a problem. What should we do about that? So we can ask, we don't have to answer the questions for them, because if we answer the questions, we're actually robbing them of that critical thinking. Critical thinking isn't having answers all the time. It's not always being right. In fact, the process of critical thinking requires you to be wrong a lot, because you're constantly going through the scientific method of making a hypothesis.
Okay. Let's talk about the okayness of being wrong.
Okay. We call it friendliness with error.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's okay to be wrong, and being wrong and acknowledging it. Being wrong and being fearless to say, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. Or that is an incorrect thought because I know that what I believed is not true. It's really hard. It's really hard, especially I think because we're embarrassed. We're embarrassed to be wrong. We're embarrassed to not know. I really don't know where that comes from, but I do see that in myself. And I also know that in my experience working with children is that when I can acknowledge that I've done something like, oh, I should have let you finish that, or I should have, maybe we can make time for you to tell that story. Like, we don't have to do it the way that I think it should be done. I mean, there are some limitations. There's obviously only 24 hours in a day. So it's not like anything can happen. When we say freedom, we don't mean freedom as in like everything is a free-for-all. It's actually a very structured freedom. There's expectations on how we move, how we choose things, how we complete things. And I mean, for example, like breaking a glass, that happens. But how we react to it and clean it and take care of it so that nobody gets hurt is more important than the fact that the glass was broken. And also I've heard and I've seen this, that even if a child repeatedly is doing something that we don't want to see, as soon as they demonstrate the behavior that we want, like for example, if that child is holding a glass and being really uncareful with it constantly, you could say, hold the glass nicely, hold the glass nicely, hold the glass nicely. You could say it every single day for 4 years and they still don't do it. We could demonstrate it 1,000 times and every single time it's the same thing. But the one time they do say, wow, I see you holding that glass so nicely. Look at what you're doing right now. That one moment of reinforcing that behavior is worth 1,000 times more than any of the redirections. And especially when we acknowledging it as an objective observation, not as good job, or because as soon as we attribute a positive quality or a negative quality to it, we're influencing our opinion on it. And I mean, certainly there are things that are appropriate and inappropriate. Like it's inappropriate to deliberately break your glass. Like, no, absolutely not. But if a glass is broken accidentally, oh, I see the glass is broken. What should we do? We need to get a dustpan. We need to make sure that no glass is on the floor because it could hurt somebody. And also, I need you to stand over here so that I can see where you are and that we can take care of this glass safely. Mm-hmm. And it's hard. I mean, it's definitely hard. It's not a perfect science. And I think that's one of the things that we all have to just be very comfortable with ourselves, knowing that we're learning, the children are learning, our families are learning. And when we have that honest, like, it's not working, what do we need to do? It's not working and it's your fault. And it doesn't even have to be said like that. The implication is there sometimes. Mm-hmm. And the children hear that. They hear that. They start to think it's their fault. And it's okay to be upset. It's okay to feel like you're in cabin fever.
Okay, so can you tell, for the folks who are not familiar with Montessori schooling methods, can you talk just briefly about what does the classroom feel like during the day? And how is that different from like every kid has their desk and that's where they sit all day long at that one spot?
Okay, well, every classroom is different, so I can't speak for all classrooms, but in my experience, the classroom generally has places where children can sit at desks and lots of floor space. And sometimes the classrooms are intertwined with other spaces, maybe an outdoor patio or an entire outdoor area. And generally speaking, the children can move from tables to the floor to the outside area within the prescribed limitations, like maybe an adult has to be with them in a certain room. And those limitations are expressed to them so that they understand. And if they don't follow those limitations, then it's reinforced to them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of movement. It behaves like an organism. And I think that's something that may feel uncomfortable at first, letting an organism operate as an organism operates. And also recognizing what are the things that are appropriate and inappropriate. Like I was mentioning, like if somebody's deliberately breaking a glass, then, a strong redirection should be there. And if it's something that the glass just broke, maybe a more gentle redirection is more appropriate. And it's different every moment, every child, mm-hmm. every situation. And every teacher is different too.
So the way I've heard you talk about it before or heard it about it, other little kids talk about it is like at a certain age, you learn different projects. And so you may have something that you're working on. So in that chunk of time, you're free to work on that project by yourself, right? So is the way I understand it, but you can correct me. To me, it feels more representative of what it feels like at home. Mm-hmm. Like mom's doing this, dad's doing this, brother's doing this. Like it feels more representative of home or of like, say, a co-working, mm-hmm. like a place where you go to co-work. Everyone's doing their own project. Is that sort of how it feels, like a little bit more like real life rather than like one person broadcasting?
Yeah, actually. I think the direct translation of what Dr. Maria Montessori called her school was a children's house. Mm-hmm. It's designed to be like a house. And they also have their classrooms with mixed ages. So a classroom can be from 2.5 to 5 or 6 years old. So you essentially have a family full of brothers and sisters all working in one space. And oftentimes it looks like a house where there's a floor space, there's tables. And the first Montessori school, the entire curriculum was based off of practical life exercises. So that would be things like how to prepare a snack, how to wash clothes, how to water plants. And there is plenty of things you can do in just basic daily life. And Dr. Maria Montessori also said that is really important to the neurological and physiological development of children, to have movement. And it's not just about the task. In fact, it's not the task. It's not, the child needs to learn how to wash clothes. No, it's the child has a sensorial experience with different textures. And most importantly, they're completing a very complex task. They're making a choice. Hopefully they're making that choice on their own. Sometimes we do suggest things to them, and then they start getting really involved with it. I mean, our cloth washing work requires them to find dirty cloths. And sometimes maybe they've previously dusted part of the wall or a baseboard or something, and they have dust all over this cloth. There's a basin for them to put the dirty cloth in. They say, I want to wash the clothes now. They need to get an apron on. They need to put the apron on properly, go get a pail for water, fill up the water, carry the water back, put the water into the basin. They apply the soap. Then they have to scrub on a washboard. They rinse it. I mean, just the hand motions alone is unbelievably powerful for their dexterity.
Okay, so for the parents out there who are like, man, I'm supposed to be homeschooling my kid, and like, the teacher sent this like workbook. You've got to like do these 5 pages in this workbook. Okay, so my question for you is, what would you tell those parents in terms of what makes, and you may have just answered this question, but what makes teaching them how to water the plants or how to make a certain snack that you've never taught them before, how to wash clothes, or a different sort of interesting task that they've never done before, wash the car. What makes that just as or more valuable than like, sit down and do these 5 pages in your workbook? And what is it that we can offer parents to sort of liberate them a little bit during this time that they do actually have the capacity to teach their children a million beautiful things that aren't like, you've got to do these 5 pages in this workbook?
I'm going to take it a little bit away from the question because another thing I really respect about how Dr. Montessori introduced Montessori around the entire world is that she recognized that every culture has different expectations. So it's not diametric where Montessori is not welcoming to workbooks or this kind of structure, which is, I think, a very big part of American education culture right now. And that's okay. It's okay. So when a child understands what the expectation is, or they're setting that expectation for themselves, they're more likely to follow through with it. And we all need breaks. Every adult needs a break. And sometimes taking a break that requires physical movement is really refreshing, or even just drinking water when we're tired, or even just moving, or like literally just moving where you are. Sometimes children will be sitting at a desk and they'll just move to another desk because they maybe don't want to sit at that desk anymore. That's okay. So, I mean, watch the child. Watch the child. See, okay, this child has incredible focus for the first 5 minutes. And then at 5 minutes, they start to slouch. So that's the opportunity you have to observe. Say, okay, the expectation is you are doing this assignment. Your teacher gave you this assignment, or what was the expectation your teacher gave you? Okay, this time right now is to do that. And then just watch them. You can just be drinking coffee, sitting next to them. You could be in the other room watching them from afar and see. There will be signs that indicate if the child is engaged or not engaged. And sometimes we do just have to push through it. Sometimes it's not that, oh, well, I know if I start like this, then I can go make a snack. Okay. There's a limit to that, though. If every single day they're doing that, they should be developing concentration and focus the more and more they practice doing something diligently. So I guess, can you ask your question again more specifically?
Yeah. So, well, and I'm not a parent, so I'm just totally making stuff up here. But I imagine that there may be a few parents out there, and I've heard from friends who are parents who, even before this whole thing started, they were having to homeschool because their kids weren't vaccinated and the laws changed and they needed to homeschool. So there may be this sort of pressure of, oh, I've got to like teach math from 9 to 10, and then I've got to teach social studies from 10 to 11. There's this whole kind of concept in the brain of what homeschooling is. And I wondered if you could deconstruct that a little bit to just how valuable, say, like you were saying, listening to a piece of music, preparing dinner. What is it that makes those life skills so important and valuable? And I'm not saying that the math and the social studies aren't important. I'm just saying to give parents a little bit of a break if they're not like keeping this regimented structure of school every day, right? Because that's not what they're usually up to. What's a way that parents can create experiences or allow for experiences to self-arise that will be good learning experiences that maybe aren't necessarily what we would think of as the workbook or the math from 10 to 11, or, you know, like what are some of those, or what experiences would you recommend, or what are some of the things that are really valuable?
Okay. Well, from a Montessori perspective, one of the reasons that we do organize our classrooms like this is to have the child have opportunities to develop concentration. If they're in a traditional environment where their classrooms are being broken up by at least 45-minute increments, they are only probably focusing for 20 minutes of the time because they have to transition to classes. There's like an introduction stage there. I don't know, because they might be transitioning from group time to independent time. So that influences the neurological development of the brain. And to back it up, when we go back home, We watch videos that are shorter and shorter. Our movies are shorter and shorter. Everything, every time our books are shorter and shorter. I mean, my mom used to read novels to me for an hour. And I think most children's books can be read in about less than 5 minutes now. So the attention span is not being supported by our culture. So that's one thing that's really important, is when a person, whether they're a child or an adult, is very engaged in something that's happening, it allows the brain to develop concentration and focus. And concentration does not look like this tense. It's very interesting because I used to think that concentration looked like that. But concentration is actually a very focused and calm experience. We have a couple different ways of looking for it. We usually involves moving the hands in some way. And I think one of the most incredible things about observing deep concentration is that when a person comes out of it, they almost have a quiet smile on their face. It's like experiencing a type of euphoria where they've actually naturally neurologically come out of a task and they've experienced their own sense of completion. That's an incredibly beautiful experience. And when a person has an opportunity to have that experience, and they're not doing something because somebody said, oh, my mom says I have to do this, that's an external motivating factor. But when a person has made a choice to do something, they've engaged in it fully, and then they have themselves come out of it with a sense of satisfaction, that's one of the greatest things that can help them develop self-discipline, self-efficacy, a sense of who they are. And nothing can shake that. Once you've had that experience, that sense of contentment, that sense of completion, you're gonna seek it again. You're not gonna seek it from an outside force as much.
So I could imagine an example where the child's supposed to be doing something, but then you come along, then they're like outside building mud patties or something else.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, instead of being like, why aren't you? You should get back to what I told you to do. Like you could, I mean, you can do that if what you're teaching is discipline, but you could also, like what you're saying, observe, what are they doing with the mud patties, and what are they trying to accomplish here? And are they good with their hands, or what are you doing here? Right? Is that what
that's one way of looking. I mean, I think this really is based on an individual's personality and their parenting style and how their family is structured, and there's all kinds of theory and practice about different ages and different children. So, and that's the adult reflecting on their expectation. If they previously told the child and the child understood that they were supposing to be cleaning up their plates, for example, and they're outside playing in mud, then I think it's completely appropriate to redirect back to the original task. And with that said, when they're done, they can go back to the mud. And I think what you're saying more is when they're engaged in something naturally.
Noticing when it happens.
Yeah, that's what it is. What is it that draws the child's attention? How are they engaged? And then is there anything else that we can do to explore that? Like if you say, oh, you're really interested in that mud. What do you notice about that mud? Or is it different after it rains? I wonder what would happen if we put it in the sun. I mean, you can set parameters, like if you don't want them to put it on the floor or on top of plants, or, I mean, what the child is interested in, and it's not prescribed. I think that's another thing that's really different about traditional education is traditional education wants to follow a lesson plan, and Montessori follows a lesson plan too, but the lesson plan has more of a discovery element to it, where just because they're playing with mud doesn't mean we have to do a entire lesson on the different types of clay that exist in the Sonoran Desert. We can go into what happens rainfall, or measuring rainfall, or what kind of plants grow in this type of soil, or what is the mineral composition of the soil, or, I mean, and it's really based off what the child is interested in. And the adult can obviously make suggestions. And I do think that it requires the adult to be open to have that sense of discovery too, because we're modeling that. So even what are the things that you're really interested in that you want to share?
So you can pass along that passion.
Or even just, it's not even necessarily that they're going to experience the same passion that the adult experiences, but show them what it looks like. And I mean, they'll probably just be interested in with it just because the adult is, but also notice when are they not interested in it, because there is a limit. Every person has their own interest level, their own concentration level, and we can see that, and then we can transition.
I noticed from watching my niece that there are like different timings to like when I engage in doing Spanish tutoring. I realized like, oh, wow, she's really focused in the morning. Like she could get into something and focus for 2 hours or more in the morning. In the afternoon, not so much. Late at night, really hard. And then also that there were certain things that I thought might be really fun, but didn't grab her as much. Like the flashcards, they were really fun. But what she really loved was reading the sentences over and over and over and over again in Spanish. I was surprised by how much diligence she had for that. And I think that speaks so much to what you're talking about, observation. It's like what we think might be interesting or what their timing or routines are could be totally different than when we actually just see what's happening.
Right. And also not getting myopic, because look at the child, watch the child, but it's not just the child. It's, are there exterior factors? Are there other people in the environment? What else is going on? Like you said, what time of day is it? What's the weather outside? So it's just a general awareness of different things.
What are some projects that you do when you're working with kids? And you can, if you want to break it down to like age ranges, you can or not. But what are some projects that you've found to be fun to do with kids? Just kind of off the cuff, like, hey, let's try doing this.
Well, I think my best resource would be what my grandma did with me throughout my life. And she just used to take me outside and we would look at the leaves and the clouds. And she was very deliberate about moving slowly. And so I had a chance to do that with her. And then she might tell me a story about a bunny rabbit that hopped along and ate a clover. And then I would start seeing things like that. Or if I saw an ant and I was really curious where the ant was going, she would let me follow it. And I mean, it wouldn't be like miles, it would be inches probably. But listening, like giving a space to listen, just going outside, feeling the breeze on your face, looking at the color of the sky, listening to the leaves, different types of leaves on different branches, how the buds are coming out in the spring, how the leaves fall off in the fall. There's so many details. There's so many things to discover. And it's just a matter, especially outside. And it doesn't have to be outside in a lush botanical garden. It could just be outside the door. And there might be nothing, but I'm pretty sure there's something. You just have to look. And if you bring a little child with you, they will find it. But when they get older, I think there's a shift that happens, I think probably around 6, where they start thinking more deliberately. And that's where there's more room to ask questions and inspire investigation and the trial and error aspect of things. So letting them make mistakes, letting them take responsibility for those mistakes. For example, if they're playing in mud and they get mud on a place they shouldn't, like their clothes, maybe they should wash those socks, or maybe they should learn, or just put the laundry into the washer or separate the colors. Just little things like that, so they recognize that it's not my sock is dirty, I take it off and then it's clean. There's a process. The discipline is in the follow through of the responsibility. Discipline doesn't have to mean like you're wrong and that's not okay. Discipline as recognizing responsibilities and natural consequences to choices is what I would define discipline as. And then I think for when a child is closer to 11 and 12, this is such a important time for them to practice that trial and error of responsibility and to also be held accountable for their choices. So if they chose to watch a movie instead of do their homework, then maybe they can't do something because there's not enough time in the day. And it's not a punishment. It's the same consequence that anybody would have if they make a choice to do something instead of something else. For example, if you don't go to work, you don't get paid. I mean, and on the same hand is if they think of something creative and ingenuitive, like maybe they go out and pick oranges and make orange juice, they can enjoy the orange juice. That's also a natural consequence.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot. We should have you on again and ask you more questions, and we can get questions from the listeners. Just to sort of wrap up, is there any sort of words of wisdom that you have, or something you find yourself often telling other parents or sharing with other teachers, or observing in some of your favorite teachers, or just any words of wisdom that would spring naturally in this moment?
I think parents are incredible. I have a lot of respect for them. And I think that we should be supporting each other a lot more and being more understanding of what we're trying, and understand that if somebody's offering a suggestion, it's not out of criticism. It's really out of love. If a person is trying to help, that means that they care. And if you don't like the way it's presented, then suggest a different way of presenting it. And that's true for a child. If you're trying to teach a child something and they don't respond the way you expect them to, especially when they're above the age of 6 and they're starting to develop cognitive thinking, you can tell them that it's okay so I can see that you're unhappy right now. Are you unhappy because of what happened? Are you unhappy about? And then you can help them have the words to describe what they're frustrated with, and then what their solution is. I had a really incredible experience with a student that I was teaching where I was really tired and I was kind of feeling flustered. Honestly, I was trying to pull off this big project and I had a very specific way on how I wanted it to be done. And he did not follow it exactly how I had expected it to be. And what I wanted him to do was to just stand and wait. And what he did was he ended up putting things in this particular order that I had asked him not to touch. And I scolded him. I said, please go back in line. Don't touch that right now. But then I looked at his face and I realized that he was experiencing some kind of hurt. And it wasn't that this child doesn't normally listen to me. He normally does. So it was very atypical, and I recognized that I was reacting to my own stress level. And then I looked at what he did, and I saw that he actually had prepared the materials for me to present what I wanted to show the class.
Aww.
And so I looked at him and I said, did you just do that so that we could move forward more quickly? He's like, yes. And I said, I'm really sorry that I didn't see that. You were right. You were right that this is the better way to do it. And he just looked at me like, what just happened? But to me, I wanted him to know that I saw what he did, and that we can move forward. We can move forward from that. And I hope that somebody like that child would be able to express in the future, for example, express to me, I'm doing this, or even maybe him not expressing anything and giving me a chance to see it was the best course of action. I don't know, but we're all people. We all have our own brain, and we all can work together on what we're working on. And children have that full capacity. That's one thing Dr. Montessori saw, is that they have everything they need, and more quickly than we realize. Like, I mean, sincerely, by 10, 11, they have physically almost every capability that an adult has in terms of how they move their hands, how they move their legs. They're just refining all of those skills. And if we can treat them with respect, that they can be a part of our world and our society by helping talk about problems that arise and not treating them like they're just like in the corner or on their iPad or playing games. No, they really can come up with solutions for their families, for themselves.
And is there any way that you would recommend to elicit that in a world where self-expression is really important and freedom of speech is really important?
Mm-hmm.
Encouraging kids to express themselves. Any last thoughts on how to elicit and create an environment where children feel welcome to speak up and self-express?
Where children feel welcome to speak up and self-express. I don't understand the question.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it as like a macro. Adults today may not feel able to speak their truth. There may be many people out there who believe something or have a thought about something, or maybe they're wondering something, but they don't feel like they can actually express it because they feel clamped down, or they feel like they'll be judged or criticized, or the community won't understand their point of view. How do we then go back to the kids and create a new world, a new environment, so that those kids don't feel like adults in terms of, I'm not allowed to speak my truth? How do we foster a healthy self-expression in our kids?
Okay. Well, I think that's a really good question. And then that goes back to observing the self. So if we're feeling like that, we can look at how are we overcoming that fear in ourselves. And I completely understand that fear. And when we experience that, we can also acknowledge, like, maybe we've been held back in the past. Maybe we're currently being held back. And that's okay. And we can evaluate, like, when do we want to speak up? How do we want to speak up? Speaking up doesn't have to be literally speaking up. It can just be being there, being present. And then if a child feels like that, or if the child sees us feeling like that, maybe we can talk about it. I do think that there are times when it's better to not say things, and there are times when it's better to say things. And we can talk about those things with children. Like, this is what I experienced. This is why I'm upset. This is what I want to say. This is how I'm going to say it. Or this is how I'm not going to say it. And this is why I'm not going to say it. Or this is how I'm going to say it. And this is why I'm going to say it. So we're demonstrating our process of trial and error, because the truth is we're all doing all of these cognitive skills constantly all the time. And by modeling and allowing ourselves to observe how we go through that cognitive development, and then including the children in that cognitive development, then they can see it too.
I love it. It's like it all comes back to self-awareness.
But not just about ourselves, how we interact with other people, how we interact with our environment. It's not a myopic experience. And so observation is not just observing. I mean, it might start with ourselves, but we also have to go outside of ourselves. And same thing with, it's not just observing an individual child, it's also observing all of the children. Like if they're at the playground, observe everything that's happening, constantly looking around, even like observing the birds in the sky, observing the wind, observing the smell. I mean, there's so many things that we can discover, and everything's always changing all the time. There is no, I can't give you a 1, 2, 3, 4 step on how to do this, because the process is the practice of awareness. And that takes a lot of time, and no one's ever done with that. We are always doing that. That's the commitment that we make when we do this. We do it for ourselves first, to ourselves first, and then we extend it to the classroom and to the world. Yeah. And just being friendly, like if we feel that we can't say something, like look at that. look at that gently. Like, we don't have to be mad at ourselves because we're scared. It's okay. And sometimes it's not appropriate. Not everybody wants to hear what we have to say. That's real. So we have to find the places that we can say it, whatever we want to say, or the ways that we can say it.
Awesome. Okay, so I can't recommend enough flower essences and meditation as practices of self-awareness. I think that would probably agree with that.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And when I hear you talking about, if you're in the playground, like notice the breeze, notice the leaves, notice that is a particular skill that can be practiced because typically we would be, right? So to like unhook the awareness from that to the breeze, to the leaves, to the kids is definitely a practice.
It's a commitment.
And
I mean, I can't wait till the day that it becomes effortless because I know that there are times when it feels exhausting. And I mean, we can be honest, like right now, I'm tired, or right now I need to step back, or right now I need to walk away for a second. I think that's okay too. We don't have to expect to be doing
perfect.
it. Yeah. I mean, it might sound cliche, but I think that's really important, especially when parents being with their children all day long, and especially teachers that are not with the children, like we totally understand that we do not expect that it's going to be perfect. We know that that's unrealistic. It's just not, because we're all people. I mean, but we do the best that we can. And we try to get better.
Thank you so much for being with us. I think that everything you said is fascinating and will be helpful to a lot of people.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.